Hey guys, we're so excited to announce that BC the Beatles is now the official podcast of Abbey Road on the River.
Taking place over Memorial Day weekend right outside of Louisville, Kentucky, Abbey Road on the River is a 5-day Beatles-inspired music festival with 7 stages, 50 bands, and over 250 concerts. This year, the headliners include Little River Band, our friend, Tommy James, The Circle, plus former Wings guitarist Lawrence Juber, and so many more.
Not to mention, we'll be there too.
Yes, we will.
Big things are in store. Come hang out with us for this super fun Beatle-filled music weekend. Right now, you can go to arotr.com, click tickets, and enter our code APPY at checkout.
You'll get $30 off either a 3-day or 5-day Ultimate Ticket to Ride Pass, which includes access to all the concerts, access to the VIP tent at the main stage where you have a restroom, phone charging, and water refill station, which is
everything,
right? You'll have a free hotel shuttle, and one of my favorite things about Abbey Road on the River, entrance to the midnight shows at the Radisson Hotel on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So much fun. Plus, you can bring a guest 21 or under for free. You'll get a matching ticket. And there's so much more, guys. Really, it's fabulous.
More details are to come, but in the meantime, visit arotr.com for more information. Enter the code ABBY at checkout. Don't miss out. We'll see you there.
See ya at Abbey Road on the River. Welcome to Because the Beatles, the podcast about the Beatles, everything about the Beatles, 24/8. I'm Allison.
And I'm Erica. And before we start, be sure to subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, or stream us on Spotify. And if you're enjoying BC the Beatles, feel free to leave us a preferably 5-star review so other Beatlemaniacs can find us.
Also, please don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We'll be posting videos, photos, and more from this episode and beyond. And don't forget, you can always email us at bcthebeatles@gmail.com. We love to hear from you guys, and we love to talk Beatles.
Hell yeah, we do.
Obviously. I mean, we have this podcast, right?
Yeah, whatever.
Like, it's not evident, really. All right. Well, you heard about Abbey Road on the River at the top of the show. You heard about our code and what you can get, which is going to be so much fun. And please keep your eyes peeled on our socials and, stay tuned for future episodes where we'll talk all about our plans. There's a lot, like we said, a lot in the works. We're so excited. We want you guys to come hang out with us and have fun Beatle times.
Things are getting super exciting in February. Mash those follow buttons. Follow us on social, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We're everywhere. And a lot of you, welcome to the new followers. What did we get, like 100 new followers?
Oh my God, we got
alone?
So many on Instagram. You guys are killing it. And it's just, it's so much fun over there. I love the community so much. The memes are killing me this week. But yeah, thank you so much if you're a new follower. If you're I don't want to say old follower, but if you followed us for a while, thank you also. But yeah, feel free to give us a follow on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. What did you say, Erica? Mash those buttons? Is that what the kids say?
Mash those buttons. That's what the kids say. Yeah, mash them.
It reminds me of like a game show in like the 90s, like mash that button.
I think it's like from button mashing, like in video games. Like there's just some games where all you do is like bang on the controller to like kill all the things.
That makes sense, I guess. I wish there was like a mash button on my keyboard on my phone. I could just like pound it with my fist and it would like all the things.
I mash my keyboard when I'm angry.
Yeah.
That's a different
been there.
Thing, no, that's bad. That's bad.
That's a whole other thing. Yes, exactly. Also coming up, besides Abbey Road on the River and all of our exciting things in February, we will be announcing our next Beatles book club book. So we're going to start that back up. We're super stoked.
Yeah, and we have a bunch of exciting guests and a bunch of exciting topics on the horizon. So we'll be previewing some of that stuff there too.
We won't tell you who it is, but we have a surprise return guest who's a fan favorite. So stay tuned for that. Coming up. I know, me too. I'm so excited. But first, we have some listener mail.
Yeah, speaking of social media, you guys are awesome sending your comments, and we love your Beatles memes. And we got a couple of comments that we wanted to share. So this first one is in reference to our episode about Linda McCartney, number 13. So during the episode, we asked third-generation fans, in other words, those who were either really young or not even born when she was alive, to tell us if the love for Linda is still going strong. We read a couple of the responses we've gotten so far, but we wanted to share this one from user I Love Paul Mac on Instagram. They say, "Hey, I'm listening to your podcast episode about Linda, and I'm 19, so I want to share what I think about her. She was beautiful. I love her with all my heart, and in my head, it's as if she were still alive. I'm so sad Paul had to live through her death, but I'm glad he got to meet her. Without her, he wouldn't have been the same person he is today. And their children, too. Basically, the third-gen fans of the Beatles love her so much. We all do, really. And we hate Heather Mills more than Yoko. And by the way, I decided I'm going to call my future child Linda.
Good choice.
Oh my God. I love Paul Mac. I love you.
Yeah.
You're amazing.
Yeah, she's so fabulous. This is great. I don't even know if we should talk about Heather Mills on the podcast. I guess let us know what you think. But it's funny. I wonder how common it is that like younger fans hate Heather Mills more than Yoko, because obviously Heather Mills is a lot closer in the rearview mirror.
I don't hate Yoko at all, but I do hate Heather Mills. So, I mean, those of us, I think, who grew up contemporary with Heather Mills, like, that divorce was killer.
Oh,
Jesus.
man.
She was so awful.
Yeah, I would be so down to break down the divorce. I remember reading the entire transcript when it came out. Like, I remember I was in college and I was at my job in the residence life office, and I was sitting at the computer just like reading the entire, like, I don't know, 200-page transcript. It was so good.
Oh, it was crazy. And then they kept publishing all this stuff in the Daily Mail, like crazy tabloid stuff.
Oh, yeah, totally. Well, it was like a tabloid shit show. It was like Heather dumping a pitcher of water on Paul's lawyer's head, like all that kind of stuff.
So crazy.
Anyway, Linda.
Yes, but not Heather. Linda.
The anti-Heather.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. We don't have that kind of thing to say about Linda, because that was not who she was.
No, she was way too badass to do any of that kind of stuff.
She was badass. Like, she was this perfect combination of badass and yet super soft and feminine and caring.
Yes, I'm so glad that comes across to people who weren't contemporaneous with her.
I remember growing up with her and thinking of her almost like an aunt almost. Like, she seemed like somebody who would just be very nice and sweet, and like she'd cook for you, you know? Like, I always thought about her like different than I thought about Paul. Like, she just seemed like somebody who was so like nice, like somebody I really wanted. I wanted to meet her almost more than I wanted to meet Paul. Actually, I did want to meet her more than I wanted to meet Paul, because she just seemed like somebody who would be so cool to talk to.
Yeah, totally. But I also feel like she would be the type of mom or aunt that like would not like take shit. Like, if you asked advice, she would like give it to you straight. It's like tough love almost, or like just not candy coating things. Probably because she's a New Yorker.
She's a New Yorker, and if you look at her kids, I mean, for growing up McCartney, like, they're ridiculously down to earth. So she, I think, had a lot to do with that.
Totally. I think Stella, like, just her spirit reminds me of a lot of Linda. Like, she seems very, like, you know, just like kind of feisty and like very, she doesn't really seem very filtered. Like, I love that. Obviously, we know that Linda had a lot of strong opinions, which is lovely. I think she kind of like kept Paul sort of in his place too. Like, they were just great foils. Obviously, we talk about this more in our Linda episode, but yeah, she was wonderful.
She was. Well, thank you, I Love Paul Mac, for continuing the Linda love. We love that so much.
I know, yes. And another social media question, comment, concern, complaint we got was about an episode that's near and dear to my heart. In September, we recorded a special, and then we did an addendum to that special about how to actually pronounce Brian Epstein's last name. And yes, it is Epstein. Okay. We've heard a lot of responses from you guys, but we wanted to share this one from at more_BRB_songs on Twitter. I wonder what BRB is. Anyway, they say, thanks for treating the issue of the pronunciation of Brian's last name as important. As you say, it is, because it was important to him. It drives me nuts to hear people mispronounce it. IMO, Any Mystery was solved way back when First Jewish Visit came out, in which his PA not only tells a caller asking for his name that it's Epstein, but emphasizes Epstein again after the unobservant caller says Epstein. This all in clear earshot of Brian. I don't think you mentioned how the caller says it wrong and gets corrected, which I think adds considerable weight to Epstein as the appropriate pronunciation. I do agree that Brian's voice should be the last word. I just wish his voice hadn't trailed off just then. More BRB songs is talking about when he actually says his own name in US Visit, but he says it very softly. And to hear that, you can listen to the addendum to our episode. But thank you for validating my craziness and wanting to set the record straight about Epstein. And yeah, I'm glad that people actually care and believe it was important because it was important to him. So that's really lovely. And please,
Yes.
please, if you haven't heard that episode, listen to the addendum because it includes the entire original episode plus Brian saying his own name.
And totally agree about your point. His staff would not have corrected somebody if it was not important to Brian and they didn't all know what the name, how his name should have sounded.
Absolutely.
100%.
Yeah, and all within earshot, as you say, it's like, yeah, that's Brian would have had no problem correcting them. He was not a guy to like let that stuff slide. His staff has talked over the years about how he was kind of hard to work for sometimes. He was very temperamental, and I don't think he would have let that shit fly. Obviously, it was important enough for him to have changed the pronunciation of his name. It makes no sense. So great points. I don't know if we did talk about how the caller gets corrected, but I do remember that now. So great point. Another chalk on the tally of why it's Epstein, because it is Epstein.
Yes, and anybody who you hear saying it the other way, no matter how fervently they say it, not true.
Not true. Not true. You send them to us. You tell them that we'll take care of it. if you hear somebody saying it the other way.
Most definitely. By the way, can I just say how cool it is that these two comments are not even about the actual four Beatles? That
that's
love
true.
For the wider Beatles universe and the people, the Beatles adjacent people, the people that helped them, supported them, got them to where they are, that people in this day and age are still really thinking about them. And I think that's amazing and heartwarming.
Oh my God. In that vein, I have a story. Maybe I should save it for my favorite Beatles thing of the episode. Maybe I will, but it kind of goes along with that kind of vein. But it deals with a first generation fan who felt that way, like in the moment. So okay, I'll save it for my favorite Beatles
teaser.
thing. But
stay tuned to the end, guys.
Now you have to stay. But yeah, no, I agree. This is great. Thank you guys again for your comments. Please write to us. We love this stuff.
Anything, any questions, anything you noticed, anything you want to discuss further, we will keep the mailbag feature going the more we get. "2020 is a full year of giant 50th anniversaries, like the anniversary of the breakup and the anniversary of Let It Be. Both very exciting and positive events. Yay. But on a lighter note...
Sarcasm?
Anyway, it also gives us a chance to kind of circle back to the beginning and celebrate 60th anniversary. The Beatles in 1960, the 60th anniversary, is a great thing to start with. And that's where we're going to start.
Yeah. 1960, at a quick glance, we were talking when we were writing this episode, it's like we both sort of went into it being like, oh, there's probably not that much. Like 60, it doesn't really come up that much in the Beatles story. But surprisingly, it actually is kind of important. Just to recap the last couple of years leading up to 1960. So John and Paul met 1957, but they didn't meet Brian or add Ringo formally as a Beatle till 61. So history sort of glosses over this year, but it's really the year that kind of set everything for the next decade. It really was the year where everything became poised to fall into place.
I think the theme of 1960 was really a transition. It was the year that they came into their own. I mean, in the 50s, they were these awkward teddy boys. They had unsure futures. Who knows what was going to happen? And in this year of 1960, they moved from these unsure young boys to these self-assured, badass powerhouses in leather who managed to harness that sense of Beatleness that we all know today in this short year.
Yeah, and Beatleness is a great word. And if you're curious to know a little bit more about that, check out our episode with Candy Leonard. She actually wrote a book called Beatleness about Beatles fans. But in this case, it's like what do you think about in that period? It's them in their cavern leathers, as they call them, becoming this wild bunch of boys that Brian would discover the next year. I think this was a very important period for them.
And not only did they refine their sound, they refined their look with the help of people they met there, including Astrid Karacher, who, yes, she definitely deserves her own episode, and their friend Klaus Forman, who also deserves his own episode.
Did we talk about Hamburg yet?
I don't think we've talked about Hamburg at all. So, Allison, who were Astrid and Klaus?
Okay, well, so Astrid, I love. So, quick sidebar: I took German in high school, and I chose Astrid as my name because of this. Anyway,
Ooh.
I love her. Astrid was a photographer in Hamburg, Germany, and the Beatles spent a big chunk of 1960 doing their first run of Hamburg shows. And not only did she really take the first official images of the band, we'll post some of those on our social. They're super well known. You've seen them, they're iconic. But she and her former boyfriend turned BFF, Klaus Morman, who definitely needs his own episode because he shows up all along the way of the Beatles story. Those two really revolutionized their look because they had these short bowl cut hairstyles and they had existential looks where they dressed all in black in these like sleek outfits. And John would call them Exes because of the existentialism. And Stuart Sutcliffe, who we'll get to in a second, we have a whole episode about him. He was in the band during this period and he fell in love with Astrid and he stayed behind in Hamburg when the Beatles went back to Liverpool and he quit the Beatles to be with her. So that's so romantic.
It is romantic, and it's interesting too that not only that it was a turning point for him, but it was a turning point for the band. It was kind of a time where they went from their friends, and there's a story where Stu was an artist and he won a painting contest, and John kind of cajoled him to use this hard-earned money he won his painting to buy a bass to join their band to be with them. But Stuart himself, he was never a dedicated musician. He was doing it for the love of his friend. So when Stuart ended up making the choice to stay behind, they started really solidifying into the hardcore musicians, first with Pete, then with Ringo.
Yeah, and I don't know if we've done an episode or we've talked about it in length. We should definitely talk about this, how Paul sort of rose throughout the years to becoming the leader of the Beatles, even though everybody perceives John to be. It's such a great topic. But I think this is where that begins because Paul and Stu were always, I mean, I don't know if Stu is really jealous of Paul or Paul and John's friendship, but I think Paul was always really jealous of John and Stu. So when Stu sort of stayed back in Germany and removed that competition for Paul to come into John's life and for them to solidify their connection. So that was a really important, obviously, event that happened.
There's a lot of things I think we could talk about the relationship between Paul and Stu and John and Paul and Pete and John. There's some very interesting dynamics there.
I know, which is ironic. I think a lot of what happens in 1960 needs its own episode because there's a lot. It's very crazy.
And I think one of the first things that we see, at least from the viewpoint of history, is that we get some of the first real recordings of these early Beatles. And the first recording was when they recorded a record together, I think 2 years before that. And they did That'll Be the Day. And what was on the other side of that?
Was it In Spite of All the Danger?
Yes, it was In Spite of All the Danger. But this was the first home recordings of the Beatles, which they did mostly in Paul's bathroom. I think there was another session that Astrid did with them too, a little later in the year. I find these really interesting because for two things. The first is that it's one of these things where it's just ridiculous kismet that in 1960 we actually have a bathroom recording of the Beatles. Given the technology and the ability to do something like that and how hard it was to record things, the number of early recordings we have of the Beatles, starting with that very, very muffled recording of the first time that Paul met John on that day when he played with the Quarrymen, when John was playing with the Quarrymen. Starting from that, and then there's the fact that they were able to put their money together and make a little record together, a two-sided record the next year, and then they got a reel-to-reel player and they just made a bunch of recordings. And I think that's really fascinating because it's surprising that you have it. I would imagine that the majority of bands playing in 1960 do not have audio evidence of their band. And we have it of the Beatles. Even though they were the baby Beatles, we still have it.
Aw, baby Beatles.
I know.
Well, we need to talk about Paul's bathroom for a second because if you remember in Carpool Karaoke, when they go to Paul's house, he talks about recording in the bathroom and how the acoustics are great. And I think he actually sits in his bathroom and sings a little bit. So
He does.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So go back to the Carpool Karaoke episode and you'll see Paul. And in the very first place, the Beatles made some home recordings, I guess.
These home recordings they're not amazing, but you really can hear what, you can hear just the burgeoning of what is going to come. I would imagine that if they had made a recording in that bathroom a year later, you could really hear the difference that having gone to Hamburg later in that year would have made.
Oh, yeah, that would have been amazing. They should have done that every year, like a family portrait, a yearly bathroom recording.
And also interesting, and we'll post this on the social because there's a like hour long compilation on YouTube of all these things. But some of the things that you hear, I mean, they did One After 909. They did I'll Follow the Sun. So they were already really confident in the ability to write and the ability to record those songs they wrote.
That's so interesting because One After 909 shows up so many times throughout their career, even to the very end. Like, that's such a fascinating tune that they kept coming back to it like that. I don't think they formally recorded it for an album until, like, what, Let It Be?
Yeah, they did not.
But it shows up on, I think, Live at the BBC. They do it there or something like that. Coming into 1960, they were still the Quarrymen, the band named after Quarrybank High School, where John and Stu went to school. They decided in early May to change their name to the Silver Beatles, Beetles. And the first thing they do is they audition to support Billy Fury, who was a big personality on Liverpool music scene. They have a big statue to him. If you go to Liverpool, it's down on Albert Dock. So they audition to support him as his band on tour, but they don't get the gig. But instead, they do get the gig to back Johnny Gentle on his tour of Scotland. And I was like, wait, all my years of being a Beatles fan, I don't know who the hell Johnny Gentle is. So I looked it up. And really, the most famous thing about him is that his backing band on this tour is the Beatles. Like,
Yes.
he even wrote a book about it. Yeah, that's all you need to know about Johnny Gentle, apparently. But on this tour, this is one of my favorite Beatles things. They adopt pseudonyms for some reason. They just decide to like change it up. So John Lennon becomes Long John, which
Ugh.
really I guess he was just like, this sounds great. Let's just do this. Long John Silver Beatles. I could see it. Paul becomes Paul Ramon. Fun fact, this actually inspired the Ramones. This is where they got their name, is from Paul Ramon.
Oh, how cool is that?
That's crazy, right? It's like such a deep Beatles fact. And they were like, the Ramones are such Beatle nerds. I love them so much.
Maybe an episode about them is in store one day too.
Oh, we should definitely. Oh,
Yeah,
I would love that. George Harrison becomes Carl Harrison. He adopts Carl Perkins' first name. Loved Carl Perkins.
How cute is that? What a guitar nerd he was.
Oh, I know.
Such
I
a
love his Carl Perkins love. So sweet. Stuart becomes Stuart DeStale after an abstract painter named Nicholas DeStale. And actually, Stuart's works have been compared to his. So it was apt, and it was appropriately arty for Stu.
Yeah.
And then on drums, I don't think he had a cool nickname, but it was Tommy Moore. But he quit the band shortly after the tour ends.
Tommy Moore was only there for a little bit. He was much older than the rest of the Beatles, and he had a day job, and he had a wife, and his wife did not like him being part of this band.
No way, really? I can't believe it.
After Tommy Moore, they really did embark on one of the key milestones in the early Beatles' career, which is that they hired Pete Best as the drummer for what was then known as the Silver Beatles.
Hi, Pete. Enter Pete.
Hello, Pete. One of the interesting things about Pete was that it really was this transition from a group of friends to a band, a group of musicians, because they basically hired him because he had a drum kit.
Mm-hmm.
And they needed a drummer to go to Hamburg when they were offered the Hamburg gig first, and they needed a drummer, so they needed to find somebody who could come on short notice and could drum and had a drum kit, and that's what they found.
Yeah, he didn't suck too bad, so he kind of got the gig, which is great. So they knew Pete because they sort of circled around the same friend groups and bands, and especially at the Casbah Club, which was run by Pete's mother, Mona, who definitely needs her own episode because Mona is one of those very overlooked figures in not only Beatle history, but Liverpool music history. Proprietor of the Casbah, very supportive. I mean, she would like go to bat for her son like nobody else. Like I think she may have like told Brian off or something after he fired Pete, but she was very, very powerful, especially as a woman in that scene.
She was definitely a mama bear, and she had her own club, which is very interesting for a woman in Liverpool in 1960. And the Beatles were very much involved in that. I mean, Paul recounts how he and the other guys helped paint the ceilings and decorate it and make it what it was.
Yeah, and if you go to the Casbah today, you can still see it. They have the painted ceiling and the walls and everything. It's all preserved, which is fucking great. I mean, there's so much of that. Obviously, the cavern's gone, the original cavern, all of that, but the Casbah is still pretty much exactly as it was when the Beatles played there.
That's amazing.
Yeah, right?
And then soon after that, the Beatles start with the wordplay that so defined John Lennon and that defined their name. So from the Silver Beatles, like the bug, on August 17th, so the rumor goes, they changed their name to just Beatles, Beatles. And it's for two reasons from what we hear. Is that the first was that it was an interesting wordplay on beat and beat music. And I think Stu came up with that part of it with the alternate spelling.
Yeah.
And then it was also inspired by the Beatles, especially John's love of Buddy Holly, who was Buddy Holly and the Crickets.
Love that. I love Buddy. So I approve, John. I approve of this. And then around the same time, mid-August, they go to Hamburg. They embark on what it was a very arduous journey. My God, it was like a train to London, boat to Holland, train or a boat to Germany. It's like when you think we can just hop on a plane and be somewhere in like 5 hours, like it's 5 hours from New York to London. It really puts into perspective how tiring and, kind of treacherous and unpredictable this kind of trip would have been.
Plus, they had all their own gear and their clothes and everything. I mean, they were carting this stuff around.
Yeah, definitely. So when they get to Hamburg, they already have a gig lined up for them at the Indra Club, and they end up playing there for 48 days. That seems so long. I don't think I realized before this episode how long they were at these clubs. That's what, like a month and a half? And sometimes multiple shows.
This was not a nice place. I think they were in like a closet next to the women's bathroom, and they had to bathe in the sink because they didn't actually have a shower. They weren't exactly being put up with a nice cushy rider at a 5-star hotel. They were earning it hard.
Then people started bitching about the noise at the Indra. I mean, what do you expect, guys? Come on. So they move over to the Kaiser Keller, where they're there for 58 days. And this is where they learn from Herr, I'm going to say this name wrong, Hirschmuller? I don't know. I took German. I don't, yeah. But one of his infamous phrases to Beatle fans is to MACH, SCHAU, which directly translates into make show, but is his way of hurrying their asses on stage to play God knows how many shows per day, per night, and entertain his guests.
And MACH, SCHAU, they did. I think they really, really honed their performance skills. They already had ridiculous senses of humor, and they were funny, and they were irreverent, but playing all night on the influence of lots and lots of drugs and a lot of speed. I think they discovered how drugs influenced music for the first time during these...
Prellies.
Preludin, which is a form of speed, which they got from both Astrid's mother, who got a back channel prescription from a pharmacist friend she knew, as well as from the bathroom attendant at the club, who was affectionately known as Mama, who had it in a big basket that she would just pass out to all of them.
I don't think I knew the thing about Astrid's mom.
Yeah.
Giving them Prellies.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Shit. Cool mom.
Yeah.
Don't do drugs. Drugs are bad. Wow. That's crazy. And as the famous story goes, during this time, I don't know if it was club, Erica, maybe you know more about this, but George loses his virginity to a prostitute. And apparently his bandmates were in the room. And after it was over, they applauded him.
That is how the story goes.
Yeah.
George was underage. He was only 17, and he lost his virginity there. Yeah, and they were proud of him. They were really proud of him.
Oh my God, that's so funny. I think George himself tells the story in the anthology. Like he corroborates it. He just doesn't have any shame. Like whatever the fuck.
Happens.
Yeah, it's so funny. Oh my goodness. So moving on from the George losing his virginity, and we'll give him a little clap. As we talked about, this is where we have some recording happening. Yay. And one of the things, sort of a pre-telling of things to come. John, Paul, and George, they play on a backing track for a guy called Lou Walters, and he is in Roy Storm and the Hurricanes. And who is the drummer of Roy Storm and the Hurricanes at this time? Of course, it is Ringo. Ringo, this really tough guy. They were very afraid of him, which is very funny.
Yeah, he was tough and super talented, and with the Hurricanes, who were known as the best band in Liverpool and preceded them at Hamburg.
Mersey Beat wasn't around yet, but I think there was a poll taken in Liverpool around this time where Rory Storm was number 1 and the Beatles were number 2. Yeah, so they were the fan favorite. And so John, Paul, and George joined Ringo on this demo. And it's the first time what would be the final lineup of the Beatles they play together. The songs are Summertime and possibly Fever and September Song, which would be love. I love September Song so much. But you know what? There's no recordings that have survived, which
it's the worst.
Makes me so mad.
Never give up, though. Never say never. You never know what's hidden in a bread basket or something in somebody's house.
That's like our mantra. Wow, mantra here on the podcast. It's like, go look in your grandparents' junk drawers. There might be a tape in there of this session, especially if your last name's Walters and a relative was in a band in Liverpool in 1961.
Go find it. I will give you $18 for it. It's probably all I have right now, but I will do it. Yeah.
That's great. I think that's worthy.
So that demo was in October, and shortly thereafter, things take a turn for the not as good for them, as George is deported for being underage. Apparently, losing your virginity on German soil does not make you enough of a man to be able to stay if you're still 17.
I guess not. And it was super duper bad timing because they'd just been courted to work at the much more prestigious Top 10 club. Like, this was a super upgrade from the Kaiser Keller. George talks about in the anthology about when he got deported, it literally took him 24 hours to get home because, as we talked about, he's taking a train to a boat to another train and all this stuff. And he said he was almost broke by the time he finally got back to Liverpool. So, I mean, I can't imagine how defeated he felt and how freaking defeated the Beatles felt, seeing George get shipped off back home. I always think about Backbeat and a couple of other Beatle biopics when they deport George being literally yanked off the stage and sent back. I'm sure it was not that dramatic, but no less devastating.
I wonder if it had something to do. I feel like it did, that they were being courted by the Top 10. They were going to move off from the Kaiser Keller. And I wonder if somebody just kind of notified the authorities.
Ooh.
I feel like there's some intrigue in
that. That is very weird timing. You're right.
Yeah, because who the fuck cares if he's 17? Like, why is this all of a sudden a thing?
Yeah, I'm sure he's not the only 17-year-old musician.
And he did sign a contract. Playing. He'd been there for a while at that point. Who's finding this out now?
That is, conspiracy.
Yes. Well, luckily, other Beatles were still behind, though, to wreak havoc.
And wreak havoc they did.
Yes. But unfortunately, it didn't turn out so well for them either. On November 30th of 1960, Paul and Pete are deported after setting a fire with a condom nailed to the wall as a big fuck you to the living conditions they were being put up in.
Well, Erica, that's one version of it. So just to play devil's advocate, I like that story too. But there are accounts that differ. Was it a rag? Was it a tapestry? Or, as the legend goes, a condom nailed to the wall? And I think Paul has even said, I mean, I don't think he's ever confirmed nor denied, but I feel like he hints to it being a condom. And people say it was because they just moved into these new digs because they were going to play the Top 10 club and they couldn't see. It was dark in the room. And so they're like, what can we set on fire? Which seems implausible and illogical. But these are the Beatles we're talking about, so who knows? And so they set something on fire on the wall, and apparently the fire wasn't even a big deal. It sort of burned itself out in like 2 seconds, but it was enough to get them arrested. So, I don't know. I stand on the condom and the fuck you, but it just makes a good story.
Well, I'm going to keep on the conspiracy theory train, and I'm just going to say that I think that the fire was small, but somebody was pissed, and they just wanted to keep getting these troublemakers out.
That is, oh my gosh, you're like building a whole like secret history right here.
I love conspiracy theories.
This is great. Okay, yeah, I'm into this. I didn't know we would go there, but I'm really happy with this. Oh my God. Well, Paul and Pete soon follow George's lead and they get deported. Bye-bye. And so I guess, John is kind of hanging out back there with Stu. Stu's like, dude, I'm going to stay here with my girlfriend. Like, I'm sorry, I'm quitting the Beatles. And cue many dramatic scenes in Beatles biopics where John like fights with Stu and Stu's just like, LOL, you simpleton, I'm an artsy genius. And, I'm going to stay here with my existential, like smart friends. And John sulks back to Liverpool. It probably wasn't like that because they would hang out on subsequent Hamburg trips and all that. But by early December, John is back in Liverpool. So we've got all the Beatles minus Stu back in Liverpool.
They're back and they're different. This year of 1960 has changed them. They are not the same guys that were recording in Paul's bathroom in April. They are leather. They have this existential look. Malcolm Gladwell's book Blink always uses the Beatles as an example of how 10,000 hours of practice on average can make you an expert. And that's a very simplified way to say it, but he uses this example of how the Beatles were nonstop playing in that time in Hamburg. And in their first year, I mean, how many nights did they play? 8 hours a night.
Yeah.
So they got a boot camp of training and they came back a totally different band in just a few short months. They were, in fact, so unrecognizable that on their first gig back, they were billed as direct from Hamburg. A lot of people in the audience thought they were actually a German import, not their Beatles. I find that their second to last gig of the year on December 27th in Litherland Town Hall was the culmination of what 1960 was for the Beatles. And it was, in essence, the beginning of Beatlemania as we know it. The Beatles, just back from Hamburg with this new look, direct from Hamburg, as they say. The lineup was John, Paul, George, Pete, and former Quarryman Chaz Newby filling in on bass since Stu had stayed behind. They were playing at Litherland Town Hall, a local venue, and actually both Johnny Guitar and Ringo Starr from Roy Storm and the Hurricane were in the audience that night, having themselves just gotten back from Hamburg. The story goes, and I find this such a very exciting story, is that the Beatles were there. They were actually a bit nervous having come back and playing their hometown after so many months of not being around. And their friend of the band, Bob Wooler, whose legend looms large in Beatles history.
Another episode we should do.
Yes. He was the DJ that night in Litherland Town Hall, and he advised the band that when he announced them, they should come on strong. And come on strong, they did. Especially Paul, who actually misheard the cue a little bit, and he jumped the gun, and he ripped into his signature Long Tall Sally early, giving these English audience this first taste, this first thrill of the orgasmic pull that would become Beatlemania. And according to primary accounts, the audience was at first totally stunned into silence. The bouncers kind of moved forward, prepping themselves for the inevitable fights that was going to happen, but there were no fights. Instead, the fans rushed the stage, screaming their faces off, dancing, and engulfed by that euphoria that 60 years later, we're still feeling.
That's amazing. And I mean, what a song to start off with. And if you've ever seen like a Beatles tribute band do it, it's even exciting when it's not the real Beatles. I can't imagine seeing like a young, fresh out of Hamburg, Paul McCartney just like tearing into the song. I imagine like no matter what, the audience has seen in the cavern or, around the city at this time when Mersey Beat was coming alive, it's like that would have been like, holy shit, like what is going on?
I mean, I can't even imagine the electricity that was in that room that night.
Right. And I know a lot of people, when they make their pilgrimage to Liverpool, they do hit up Litherland. And I would like to at some point. I think it's out in the Wirral, which is a little bit outside of the city center. But it's such an important and overlooked venue in the Beatles' history.
I feel like that was the start. That year, that incredible year, laid an amazing groundwork for what we came to know as the Beatles.
It's crazy because people often talk about the Beatles like they, as a band, packed so much into a decade. Like they went through how many transitions of their looks through music. They, revolutionized culture like in 10 years, which is not that long. I mean, 10 years goes by like that. And in 1 year, they started the year as a band recording simple tracks in like Paul's bathroom, as you said. And they go and create this like frenzy at the end that's going to snowball into 61, where a lot changes. And then obviously 62, 63, it's pretty phenomenal. They were always just like pouncing on the next thing. And I think that that momentum is amazing.
And think about like what did 1960 establish for them? I mean, it established their haircut and their style.
Yeah.
And even though they got out of the leather, that Beatle bowl cut was, a remnant of what they did, what Astor did for them in Germany. And I mean, I would say that probably the attraction of the boys in leather was one of the main attractions when Brian saw their look, even though he changed it. That is certainly a shock to the system, I would imagine.
Oh, definitely.
And they built up a huge repertoire of songs out of necessity because they couldn't just keep doing the same 20-minute set if they had an 8-hour show every night. So they did their covers, they worked on these originals, many of which made their way into Beatles albums, or, they're just inspiration for their own songs. I mean, if you look at something like Long Tall Sally, now, of course, it slipped in my mind. What is the song that he did?
What do you mean? I'm Down?
Yes. So if you look at Long Tall Sally.
Hey, I got it.
Yeah, you got it immediately. I'm Down is that song would not have been written had Paul not been so immersed in this music that he loves so much and doing all of these covers.
And let's not forget, this is where they first like really found out about the druggies and the Pirellis and what an effect those had on the life of a performer, especially when you're pushing your body to the limit, performing so long and for, so many nights at one time.
And whatever your opinion is on drugs, it can't be denied that the Beatles used drugs to their advantage musically, whether it was the speed or whether it was weed or whether it was psychedelics later on. I mean, they did, and this was the first time they ever did.
Plus, they made so many connections. They first encountered, really kind of in close quarters with Ringo. They had obviously seen him around the scene in Liverpool, but when you're thrown together in a foreign country playing all these shows, it's like you really get to kind of like bond with people. And, it's almost like being in war together.
And also just randomly, what an odd thing that in 1960, 15, 16-ish years after World War II, that England was sending all of these musical acts over to Germany. It's a strange
ironic
thing. And I'm sure that it really tickled John's sense of humor because he always loved Nazi jokes.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So I think he did enjoy it. He would stomp around calling them, fucking Nazis in English and they couldn't understand and everything, and doing the Hitler walk and goose steps and the mustache and everything. So I'm sure that he did enjoy that quite a bit.
Oh my God, John. What are we going to do with you? You naughty boy.
I know.
My God. But yeah, guys, 1960, a lot more than we thought it was going to be.
Yeah, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. 1960 was a great, crazy year. So I would advise anybody who's interested in early Beatles, don't skip 1960 because it's really, really formative.
Absolutely. And we'll probably touch on Hamburg a lot, in this podcast. And it was so important to them. But, really, I'm so excited that we're celebrating the 60th anniversary of things. It's much less depressing than talking about the breakup right now.
Yeah, the early Beatle time is so interesting. I mean, not only because of the speed and pace at which they went at such a young age, but also just the optimism and the kismet and the ridiculously impossible things that happened to make this story happened for the most part in this 5-year period between 1957 and 1962.
Yeah. Moving on to, as we do every episode, talking about our latest Beatles obsession. So, Erica, what are you obsessed with?
Well, I don't know if I've mentioned this, but I really like Paul McCartney.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I really like him. And actually, I really, really like his solo stuff. I feel like...
no way.
Yeah, I know. There's so much there. There's so many deep cuts. And Paul McCartney brought back a feature on his website that they had last year, and they kind of let it trail off. It's called Sticking Out of My Back Pocket. And what it is a a short playlist they put on Spotify of a mix of popular Paul McCartney songs and really deep cuts around a theme. So it popped back up a couple of days ago, and I was super excited because I missed them. And this month for January, they're focusing on New Beginnings themes. So it's just like a half an hour playlist of stuff that everybody knows, like, coming up and, I don't know, things that I know, but, things that are very popular to me, like new and ever-present past, but also some like really, really deep cuts. Like one of my favorites is Sing the Changes, the Fireman from his Fireman album.
Oh,
I think it came out in like 2009. It's one of my favorite Paul McCartney songs of all time. Like Ram On.
Oh my gosh.
How random is that? Like Great Day, Every Night. Like this is just a really good, nicely curated playlist. And I think it's a great way to learn about, like to experience some of his deeper cuts. Like a couple of years ago, I think in 2016, do you remember that album that they put out, Pure McCartney?
I do, yeah.
And it was like a 3 or 4 disc compilation with this huge like greatest hits, and it was sort of the same thing. Like it was a combination of like radio hits plus deeper cuts, but it was super long. It was like 65 songs or something, and that's not really manageable. And this, I like this because it's manageable. It's really well done as far as the curation is going. It's nice that it's a theme. So I would totally recommend checking out Sticking Out of My Back Pocket. You can find it on all of the playlists on Spotify.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. And let me just say, it makes me very heart glad that by doing these playlists and digging out some of the stuff you might not hear all the time, he's like acknowledging what I feel are neglected albums, like Off the Ground, which I love, and Driving Rain, which I will defend, and I will defend on this podcast. But, like these albums that he's forced to kind of like mine for these themes, like, yes, Paul, acknowledge Off the Ground. Like, we want you to play shit from that album on tour, please. Like,
yes, we do.
Hope of Deliverance, whatever. I don't care. Just, I mean, I could definitely tell you what tracks, but whatever, just play something from Off the Ground. So it's cool because, a lot of people might not have been exposed to Off the Ground before. Yeah. So maybe a track, on one of these playlists will get them to listen to it.
Can I just say, and I'm going to put this out in the universe because I've always wanted Paul to do this. How awesome would it be if Paul did a deep cuts concert, but not a live concert because we all know people aren't going to go, but like a web stream concert that like you can,
oh my God,
some kind of like exclusive thing, but it's all deep cuts and like super obsessed fans can kind of like, vote on things and write stuff in, and he'll do like a nice long concert with all the stuff that he never does in the big arena shows, and we could live stream it. We could watch it on our nice big TVs and like together at like watching parties. This is my dream.
Oh my God, this sounds amazing. Paul, we know you listen to us, obviously. So make this happen.
If anybody
please.
From MPL is out there, please do it. Please do
I know, really. Oh my gosh. And honestly, like I would pay like buku bucks to go to a show like that.
Exactly. I would pay a good amount to just stream a show like that.
Totally. I'd also pay a good amount for him not to do things like Magical Mystery Tour again on his sets. Like, can I pay for that? Can I pay for him to get rid of some of this shit? Anyway, sorry.
That's a topic for another entire episode.
I know.
And once he comes back on tour, we're hitting it.
Yes. Okay, great. I love it. Let's do that.
So on to something else that's not Paul. Allison, what are you obsessed with this week?
How do you know it's not Paul?
It could be Paul. It could be Paul.
It could be Paul.
Everything is really about Paul underneath it. But I'm just going to expect that you're not obsessing over the Sticking Out of My Back Pocket playlist.
I'm not. I did see he posted it, but I hadn't checked it out yet. But I'm glad you mentioned it because it reminded me that I have to listen to it. But so I have 2. One, shout out to Erica. She got me the most kick-ass freaking Christmas present.
Oh, that's me.
That's you. She, as we talked about, went to the Beatles pop-up store in New York. Is that still around or is that gone now?
No, it ended December 22nd.
Ah, that sucks. But anyway, she got me this awesome 45 case. And number one, I needed a 45 case really bad. So the universe must have like told you. But it's so well made, and it's got like photos of like the Beatles singles and like Beatles pictures like on the front, and it looks very vintage.
Yeah.
So I currently have it on display in my living room. And I just love it so much. Thank you, Erica. I love it. It was great.
Seems like something that would be so you.
Oh, yeah. Wonderful to come home to after being away for the holidays. It was lovely.
Yay. I'm so glad you like it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I love it. And then my second thing, which only happened yesterday. So I was having some drinks because this weekend, probably by the time this goes up, it'll be over. So you guys can know the results of this. But the Grammys are happening. And we're up for a couple here at work for our Woodstock box. I'm so nervous. So we were having some drinkies yesterday with the producers who were nominated. And so I was talking to one of their wives, and she is the best. She's super cool. But she was talking about how she saw the Beatles when they were, I think it was 60, I don't know, 64 or 66, but they played in Detroit. And she and her teenage babysitter went, and they got these seats that were right by the tunnel where the Beatles sort of came out. They were playing in the arena there. So they obviously were super close to the Beatles when they came out, but she said that she looked down at one point and saw a guy in like a checkered shirt, and she reached down and like touched him. And Erica, it was Brian.
Oh my God.
She touched Brian. But here's where it gets crazier. Before she even did that, she knew it was Brian because she knew he wore like checkered shirts like that. And she had like a weird Brian obsession. And I was like, excuse me.
Oh my God, you met a soulmate.
We need to talk. I know. I'm like, oh my God. So we were sitting at drinks, and totally after she had told me this, like it was a couple hours later, and we were talking about my cat, and I was showing her pictures of my cat and stuff. She's like, oh, what's his name? And I said, Epi, after Brian upside. And I was like, oh shit. And like, we just pointed at each other. I'm like, see? And, we were just had a moment where we're like, oh my God, we're both like crazy about Brian.
Aww.
But it was so nice. I like never meet people like that. They're usually like, okay, you like Brian, that's weird, So that was really lovely. Yeah, it was a really nice moment. Yeah, I loved it.
Yay. Well, new Brian friend. Here's new Brian friends.
I know.
Yay.
I love it. So yay.
Yay.
Hooray.
Well, I think that's it for today. So thanks for listening to BC the Beatles. And as always, please subscribe on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening right now. Give us a rating and review so other Beatlemaniacs can find us.
Yes, and please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We'll be posting photos and more from this episode and beyond. Don't forget, you can always email us at bcthebeatles@gmail.com. Tweet at us, DM us, whatever. And, we might feature your response here on the show. And until next time, we'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.